As the case may be, good evening, and welcome to Distribution Strategy Group's Technology Leader Panel on the Distributors Technology Dream Stack. In a few moments, I will be introducing the panelists, Daniel Edwards from Net at Work, Jeff Bosch from Infor, Justin Cowell and from Spiro.ai, and Neil Diamond from ECI. But I want to share a couple things first. This idea of the Technology Dream Stack is an intriguing one. I've worked with distributors who were, say, 75 or 80 million dollars in size, who had the tech stack of a $2 billion distributor, meaning it was as good or better than a $2 billion distributor. And then I've worked with larger distributors that have maybe not such an interesting technology dream stack. It's a much richer world that we live in today as we think about the technology stack. It's not just the ERP and the WMS. If we roll the clock back 10 years ago, maybe you didn't have CRM, maybe you didn't have e-commerce. It's a much richer world. So we're going to be looking at different aspects of the technology dream stack, which, if done right, is going to create competitive advantage for you as a distributor with the efficiencies that you're going to gain. I'd like to share a little bit about our conference coming up in June, the Applied AI for Distributors 2025. It's June 24th to 26th in Chicago, right near the O'Hare Airport at a Marriott hotel. You see the QR code there at the bottom, or you can go to appliedaifordistributors.com. We'll be covering a number of things, including a comprehensive agenda on AI applications, different thought leaders, sessions on AI-driven sales techniques, revenue growth strategies, future of AI and distribution. And if you are among the first 75 registrants, you gain access to a pre-conference session titled Distribution 2030 AI-Driven Transformation. Some of the speakers that we're going to include are really exciting. We've got Noelle Russell, founder and chief AI officer at AI Leadership Institute, Don Sarno, SVP of Digital Enterprise North America at Sonepar, and then Trent Gillespie, CEO of Stellus AI and former senior AI leader at Amazon. So it's really shaping up to be a tremendous conference. We'd love to see you there. And now I'd like to welcome our panelists for today's discussion. Daniel Edwards from NetSuite, Jeff Bosch from Infor, Justin from Spiro, and Neil Diamond from Evolution X ECI. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Jonathan.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
And when I said good evening, that was to Daniel, who happens to be in Thailand right now. So what time is it your time there, Daniel?
It actually has rolled over at this point, Jonathan. It is 12:04 a.m. So good
Oh my
morning.
gosh, burning the midnight oil.
Yes.
Well, good. I think one of the really interesting things in looking at a tech stack is what kind of an approach are you using? Are you using an all-in-one provider, or are you using a best-of-breed approach? Be curious about different thoughts on the overall tech stack. We'll talk about your particular areas during the course of the discussion. But in terms of the overall tech stack, how do we think about best-of-breed versus single provider at different parts of the market, low, mid, large? Just please jump in.
So
So-
I'm
Oh, go ahead.
yeah, no, go on. You got ahead of me.
All right. No worries. All right. So at Spiro, we kind of see a gamut from SMB to smaller enterprise customers, and kind of the trend that we see as customers are smaller, they generally want to stick to all-in-one solutions. There's less pain, less management, less overhead operationally to manage that kind of thing. As they kind of evolve, and if they decide to invest in the technical side of things and invest in their software, invest in their processes and operations, we tend to see them start to want to split out and try to find best-in-breed solutions. And the important qualifier there is that they are investing in that stuff, because I see very large distributors, very large companies decide not to invest in technology. Maybe you want to invest in more salespeople, you want to invest in more office space, better facilities. So that's a choice you have to make. And I'm sure my fellow panelists have lots of opinions on that too.
Yeah, I would probably echo a good bit of that. It does depend on the size of the organization, how much they want to split away from a single provider. Single providers, of course, they can have multiple different offerings, right? And so those offerings can run the gamut from an ERP all the way up to CRMs and very disparate systems. And that has certain advantages to keep things in-house, especially if they're connected up. I had an old a boss who always used to talk about one throat to choke, right? To pardon the expression,
Classic.
right? Classic, exactly, right?
Yeah.
And there's a real advantage to that, especially when you're a small organization. You don't have individual teams that can manage that complexity with other organizations. But the downside to Justin's point is exactly that. You're going to be sacrificing certain best of breed technology, but at the same time, you might not have the capabilities of making that level of investment to take advantage of those. So it's always that ROI. How far can I reach to actually take advantage of those best of breed products?
And I would
This is
echo the
John.
sentiment. Sorry, Jeff, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Daniel. Go ahead.
I would just very quickly echo the sentiment that we see it almost as an evolution to play upon what Neil and Justin just said, that organizations that we see on the smaller end of the market, they actually, one of their systems is probably Excel, and they just have all these pieces that going to an all-in-one solution, they see it as that consolidation of getting everything I'm doing now under one umbrella. So there's some efficiencies there. I'm not managing systems and integrations, but then once they reach a specific point, and it's different for each organization, we see them branch out in specific areas. It may not going complete best of breed of here's my finance, here's my CRM, here's this, but they may look at something like, well, we do need to do more demand generation, and the CRM that's built into this all-in-one is good, but it's not getting us there. So we want to look at what can we bring in as best of breed from a CRM perspective, because a lot of the all-in-one solutions, I always say they're 10 miles wide, but only 5 miles deep, that you get all of this functionality, but when you need to go deeper, that's when they start looking at best of breed. And then at the upper end, we are seeing, when I say upper end, let's say $1 billion plus, they are going more, here's my core financials, here's my CRM, here's my WMS, here's my TMS. So it's kind of an evolution as you move up market as well.
Yeah, I see a lot of lineage in the customers and prospects that I speak with today, right? In terms of how they grew up on their tech stack. So, if they're running, an older core ERP or something a little less sophisticated, and maybe, they grew up and saying, well, we really need to focus on CRM. And so they went best of breed CRM, and we really need to focus on warehouse management. So they went a best of breed WMS. Then what happens is eventually that core gets to a point where it can't sustain the innovation that's available now with like AI and RPA and machine learning. And they need to move on. They need to upgrade that. They need to move on. And then they come into a question or a dividing point where they have to look and say, okay, what I was doing with that best of breed, do I have the people capabilities to handle that? Am I getting full advantage of that? Or is that functionality that I can bring back into, my core ERP or what's the offering there, right? And so we're seeing that, where a lot of groups grew up. And again, that's probably more in that mid-size area, where they grew up, they had an IT staff, they could build things out on their own. And it was good stuff they built, but now it's just becoming too much. Things are advancing, right to that point. And so they're looking to grow. And then I would second, what everyone's saying, and Dan, you mentioned this on the enterprise side, right? I mean, those groups, they have that opportunity and the staff to bring in more solutions, and they have the functional staff to really make those sing, right? To be able to leverage those to their full extent. And so, there's opportunity, and sometimes there's happy medium as well. But, I see it really a lot of times that lineage, just how they grew up as to where they're at, and now they have to make those decisions. What are they going to do moving forward?
Since so far has been about software, when we think about below the technology infrastructure line, servers, storage, networking, etc., how do we think about best of breed versus all-in-one there? By the way, if we roll the clock back many, many years ago, IBM was it. We didn't have the concept of best of breed. We didn't have the concept of tech stack. There was one neck to choke. It was IBM, and they covered you below the infrastructure line, above the infrastructure line. But how do we think about the below the infrastructure line from a technology dream stack perspective.
Yeah, I was going to comment. Nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. I think that was the quote, wasn't it, Jonathan? Right? I mean, that was there. I'm going to chime in real quick. I mean, infrastructure is an interesting one, especially as more things move to SaaS based. Everything's in the cloud. Really, it's become more of an equalizer in that area. I would say that less folks are really wanting to take on technology that they have to self-support, again, that horsepower, being able to maintain that, grow that, and especially groups that are really looking into more of that advanced functionality, or they're really looking into, AI, ML and trying to get advantages there. They're realizing, how they can quickly outgrow their stack. And so I would say that, under the covers, it's a big play. We're seeing groups that are maybe before were hesitant to say, hey, I don't really want to go to cloud, or I'm going to maintain my independence. And they're really just moving forward. They're seeing those advantages. They're seeing the opportunities there, and really stepping into that technology gung ho.
Yeah, I agree totally. I mean, unless for whatever reason, hosting your own hardware is a competitive advantage, I really encourage folks to not be hosting their own hardware, because you're just losing out on so much of the capabilities, integration capabilities out there, and you're losing out on product feature, and you're maintaining staff that you probably they could be focused on something else.
Yeah, absolutely. And even when you're talking to your SaaS providers, it always surprises me how few people actually ask about our tech stack, right? Even in demos and things like that. I think you should be talking to your SaaS providers, and that, because everybody does talk about, oh, we're in the cloud, we're in the cloud. And that's probably true for the vast majority of SaaS products out there on the planet at this point. But that being said, it all depends on what's under the hood, right? Not all SaaS, not all architecture in the cloud is the same. And definitely, don't shy away from asking those questions. And it should be something that SaaS providers are happy to talk about, their scaling capabilities, how quickly they can deploy code into their infrastructure, where is it hosted, in terms of data protection policies and things like that. Certainly, you can, the fact that people are SaaS providers and in the cloud is great, but there's a lot of questions that are worth asking and digging just a little bit deeper to make sure that you have the SaaS provider that's built on a modern infrastructure in the cloud.
That's a great point, Neil. And it's interesting, just very quickly, it's interesting you bring that up, because in my deck for presentations, when we're talking to prospective clients, I talk about the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure and the autonomous database, and it just seems to they want to hear about the features and functionality, but it's so important, because I can tell you anecdotally, in the last 6 months, we've had 3 clients on one of our legacy systems separately get hit by ransomware, and all of a sudden cybersecurity is at the top of their mind. And maintaining those servers, they just, they realize that they need something more, and they just don't have the manpower or the wherewithal to invest to do that. But it's really important. But it's interesting that a lot of clients gloss over that, and I'm glad you brought that up, because it's super important to understand, what is your technology provider using in their stack that's running your company.
And I would say, Neil, to that point, I see that question being asked more at the enterprise, the multi-billion-dollar organizations. They're becoming, that's the differentiator. They're assuming that a lot of the capabilities are table stakes now, right? Everyone can process orders and order to cash. And they're really looking at, what can I do to keep pace with the technology change? What does your, that support level, that operational services level of your software look like? How is it running on the cloud? What services is it integrated within that tech stack? To your point, where is it running? How are you leveraging that? So those are questions we're starting to see. We're seeing those definitely with some of the larger customers, where they have, again, probably, that level of expertise to understand and ask those questions. But it's coming down more and more. And we're seeing that as a bigger differentiator in terms of, how are you really going to keep me going with the future, right? I don't know if my business process itself may change. I'm still going to take orders, but all the technology around that and capabilities, and the integration points, what do you have to offer that's going to be able to keep pace with AI, ML, RPA, and integrations that I'm going to be able to leverage going forward?
Those are really good points. I think one of the things that we glossed on earlier is that oftentimes distributors don't have these folks on staff. And I think one of the things that you kind of keep in mind, if you're kind of have to ask these questions is kind of have someone around that you trust, or having someone on staff that can ask these types of questions. You don't have to be able to handle every implementation yourself, but kind of having a trusted partner or someone on staff that can be kind of your operational CIO type role to ask these types of questions that will help you make better decisions as you kind of come up on this stuff.
Just shifting now to looking at some of the offerings that you as the panelists have. And what I'd like to talk about sort of one by one is what are the key aspects of, for example, e-commerce or ERP. What's differentiating? And it could be functionality, it might be some other aspect that's differentiating that you have. So let's start with you, Neil, if you could, talking about what's the key functions of a e-commerce solution, and what would be differentiating today relative to 5 years ago?
So it's going to be specific for each industry and obviously each customer. But in broad strokes, and talking about our experience in the marketplaces that we've been in, is what we've seen is e-commerce has been somewhat of a commodity now, right? E-commerce is just everywhere. You can do it in lots of different ways. There's tons of applications out there that do really well. You kind of have your pick, almost too many choices, you might think. For us, what we noticed in our experience and in ECI, just how it works, right? So there's 42 different products. Each of these products came out of very specific industry needs and the realities in that space, right? So all the features, functionality, how they work, the business processes, those ERPs in those spaces grew up in those markets, in distribution, industrial, and so on. And so what has ended up happening in ECI's experience and Evolution X, which is now part of ECI from the e-commerce standpoint, before it was purchased, what we ran into was actually not having, it wasn't a matter of when we got into the marketplace and we said, hey, have a look at our feature set, let us do demos. We would get in and we would do those demos and they'd be very impressed. And oh my God, it's amazing. It's flexible APIs, et cetera, et cetera. Tons and tons of feature set. But then the question would come up, does it integrate with my ERP X, right? Does it have this integration point for maybe a CRM that we've built around? And this is like our core. Now for us, it was primarily ERP, but it could be a CRM. It could be any of the tech stacks that you've really kind of, as a business, hovered around, and that's your master controller of the data. And so that's where we ended up joining with ECI, was exactly that, right? Once we were able to build in those integration points, and we were able to actually hand off orders and have that two-way sync between different ERPs across different industries, that changed the game. That opened up the markets for us. That enabled all the feature set that we had to be used, but only once we had those integration points.
So you've referenced both ERP and CRM. Was the ERP the main advance you've seen in that 18 months since you've been acquired?
Exactly. Yeah, definitely. Like it was literally the ERP, because fundamentally it was the master control of the data, right? That's the one, that was the really hard piece. That's the piece that it takes multiple years for a company to change from one ERP to the next. It's not something you do every day. That's kind of where you double down in your space, right? That's the thing. That's the software that runs my world. And then everything needs to come off of that, right? Now, I think depending on the software stack, you can go further upstream than that. But for us, in terms of the e-commerce side of things, we had to have that integration before people were really able to sign on the dotted line. Yeah.
What else would be differentiating for an e-commerce platform in 2025?
I think in 2025, you got to be talking AI. I mean, I think that is, I wouldn't even say it's differentiating. I would say it's table stakes. I think
Great.
It's more of a question of what are we going to do? What are you doing? Where are you taking AI? How are you building it in to your processes moving forward? It's troublesome because I call it table stakes, right? Moving forward. But we're also all figuring it out and learning it and figuring out how it fits into the tech stacks that we have in e-commerce. It's going to be slightly different. If you're coming from the ERP space, it's going to be slightly different. What we have definitely noticed in our implementations of AI agents and things like that is the ability to bring lots of data together, right? So it's not enough for us to deliver, say, for example, an AI agent that is able to query and understand the e-commerce orders, the analytics data inside of the e-commerce system. We also need to be able to do that from the ERP, right? We might need to be able to pull from the CRM. We might need to be able to pull from another tech stack and bring this information together. So that, I think, is going to be the real challenge moving forward, is not just having those capabilities, but how do we bring all that information into one place that we can actually query and drive real value for the customers.
So the answer is integration, but as it pertains to AI.
Yeah.
Could you give some
AI
examples?
built in your product. Yeah.
I'm sorry, please continue.
Oh, I was just saying not just integration, but AI being native and built into your product. I think that's really, really important for 2025.
Yeah.
So, should mention we have, we can take questions from the audience. I will require you to be identified rather than anonymous if you want to pose a question. So there's a Q&A button down at the bottom, and don't hesitate to use that. Justin, let's continue with you. When you think about CRM, what are the core functions? What's differentiating in CRM today?
Yeah, it's kind of when Neil answered that question, he kind of took the mindset of like what's 5 years ago versus now, the difference. And I think about before starting Spiro, I used to be a Salesforce engineer and implementation consultant after that. And so I built Salesforce for a lot of really big customers. And before that, I used to build a product called Siebel, if anyone here ever used that. And so kind of, I think like if I answered that question like 5 to 10 years ago, I would say the building blocks of CRM are a companies tab or in a opportunities module and a cases module. I totally think that's not the case anymore. I think about CRM and the core components of a modern CRM. I think about a database. I think about an automation layer, and I think about an intelligence layer. And I think a lot of these different features or use cases are different combinations of that. And so things like marketing and things like customer service, things like opportunity management, those are, you have a database that stores your opportunities. You have a database that stores your marketing contacts. You got a database that stores any cases or service tickets that come in. But you have applications that are running automations on top of that to help you make your life easier. And hopefully you got an intelligence layer, whether it's AI, some kind of machine learning that help you understand what's happening or give you proactive suggestions on what to do next. And so I think from a modern CRM, that's what you're looking at. Does it have, a strong database that has the structure controls that you can manage? Does it have good automations that make your life easier when you're using it day to day? And how does AI or some kind of intelligence layer on top of that so you can get some insights out of it, you can get your analytics, or it can kind of help you make your life easier and faster with the new technologies available.
Interesting point. You didn't use these words, but it seems like what's different today in the DreamStack CRM is that it's not passive. It's not just a repository for data. I mean, it's. You want to finish that thought?
Oh, that's totally right. It's not passive. It should be proactive, honestly. It should be taking data. And so like what we do at Spiro, we integrate to your email and your calendar, and we automatically bring that in. We integrate to ERP. Neil mentioned ERP kind of being the source of truth for financials, and we agree with that. So we bring data from there. And what used to be data entry in Salesforce, like a rep having to log in a task or an activity or going to create a contact, that should happen automatically. And so like what Spiro does, we suck all this data in, we match it on the back end, and we make suggestions, proactive suggestions. Hey, you haven't talked to this customer in 90 days. Hey, that's someone that you should be in front of. You mentioned in your email that you've mentioned this keyword. Is this an opportunity that should be added to the system? Should we do it for you? That's where AI is today. And I think that a lot of customers don't understand, or, people who are in distribution specifically, a little behind technology, they don't understand that technology can do this kind of stuff and really help automate that stuff and be very proactive with you when you're when you're working in these systems.
Maybe in here is that that you mentioned was, it used to be the CRM was trying to get data from the user, and now it's bringing data to the user, right? And
Yeah.
that was kind of a dead end, a cul-de-sac for distributors, because sales reps view this as a management tool anyhow, like a control management tool. And now it's not that way. I mean, it's actually bringing things to the end customer, right?
That's correct. That's correct. And
Yeah.
when we're talking to a lot of our distribution customers, there's a lot of often time resistance with CRM in general. They're like, it's another thing I got to enter data into. I got to, figure this out. I'm like, no, you don't understand. We have your customers from Infor, from, your ERP or whatever. It's just going to happen. You don't have to do anything. And so that's a mind shift for a lot of folks in distribution. And I think as AI gets better, technology gets better, that's really the model going forward. It should automatically suck that stuff in for you. You shouldn't have to go and enter it.
Correct. Yeah.
This component-based architectures, what are you seeing in these dream stacks? What patterns have you seen in successful versus challenging implementations?
I think that's a comment for Justin, but I was going to ask
So
Justin.
No,
yeah,
no,
I couldn't hear
there's a
that first
question for
part. Sorry.
Daniel. There's a question for Daniel, actually.
Oh.
Sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you were directing it at Justin. So challenges in implementation. So I would say there's a couple challenges. We've discussed in the past a skills gap moving to some of these modern technologies. So we'll just call them modern technologies. And to build upon what Justin said, I mean, we're no longer talking about ERP, we're talking about intelligent ERP. It needs to be autonomous. But one of the things that we're seeing as a challenge, it really isn't the technology itself, it's the user base. And it is a paradigm shift where you're moving from a place of constant interaction with the system to give it information, versus the system being proactive, that intelligent ERP, and giving you the information. So one of the ways to overcome that challenge, and I'm just going to specifically speak to Oracle NetSuite, is changing the user experience, changing the user interface to make it more, I'm just going to call it user friendly for that skills gap. So I don't necessarily have to know the ins and outs of AI. I just need to know, how do I interact with the system to get it what it needs so it can give me what I need. And that user interface and that user experience is a huge focus across the Oracle family of products, not just Oracle NetSuite, Oracle Parent as well. They're migrating to, just by way of example, the developers were saying, why are our business systems more difficult to use than the apps on our smartphones? So they're building in that type of user interface to make it just, as we have a workforce that's retiring and a workforce that's up and coming, that's expecting that kind of user interface. That's the challenge we see, is the skills gap. The other challenge is there's again a paradigm shift when you're looking at implementing these new technologies, and it's understanding, to Justin's point, everybody, like I went to the National Association of Wholesale Distributors conference in DC last year, and almost every panel was talking about AI. How do you implement the AI? So again, it's not necessarily the technology, it's where do I use it? I know it's technology that could provide advantage to me, but where do I use it? So the challenge from an implementation perspective is really kind of wrangling the team to say, what are the priorities, and how do we use the technology to meet your company's expectations as far as the growth and specific strategic goals? So those, I would say, those are the two big, the skills gap, and actually determining what is the goal of the technology. Is it improved customer service? Is it faster fulfillment? And then concentrate on that to make sure that your success is being realized in that implementation.
Yeah.
Daniel, I feel like every trade show I've been to the past year that's either manufacturing or distribution focused, there's always huge panels on AI.
There is.
It's like the boogeyman in the room. No one knows
It
what to do
is.
with it. And like, I think the issue is that the scope is too big and people
It
don't
is.
understand how to harness it, right? And so I think with AI, exactly like you said, you kind of have to slim the scope down. You have to figure out what's the benefit I'm going to get out of it, and kind of digest it a little bit in smaller chunks. Like at Spiro, what we do with AI, it's more at content generation. Like it can write emails for you if you need help with that, or it can like
Mhm.
summarize the
Like generative
emails that are going.
AI.
Like
Mhm.
it's just, it's more around summarization, visibility. But like if it's just, hey, use AI, like what do we do with that? I don't know. And so you really need to be hyper focused in where the use cases are, because if you're
Okay.
just like saying, hey, use AI, you're behind. I don't know what to do with that. Like that doesn't help me
Yeah.
at all.
I think you
Yeah,
made
and
a
that's
good
where
point.
to your point earlier, that's where publishers, I'm sorry, Jeff, I'll talk for 2 seconds.
Oh,
That's where publishers are including that type of technology into their products now. So, we call it text enhance, that if I put in a couple keywords, it can create a description, it can create an email for me. There's AP automation where it takes an image and creates an AP bill. So it's kind of pushing the end user to say, hey, here's AI, you're using it. But to your point, everybody's talking about it, but they don't know how to use it. So it almost seems like the publishers are saying, here's how you use it. And then it's up to the user to decide, does this fit into my model?
Yeah.
Jeff,
yes.
Jeff, before you are in, I want to make sure we ground on the ERP
Oh,
uh, core functions, what's differentiating, and then let's go into that AI discussion. And by the way, Robin, who's asked a question, we'll try to address that after Jeff goes through his part on ERP.
yeah, sure. I can build into that, right? So, I mean, I love the comment Neil made earlier about, ERP, the software that runs their world, right? I mean, we still kind of see that it is, as Justin put, the data, the end all be all database is there, right, under that. But when we think about, what makes, ERP, modern ERP, again, I mentioned, we start thinking about platform, right? And do I have that platform that's going to be able to grow and going to be able to accept these new technologies? The other thing, we take an approach at Infor, we speak about value, right? So how am I using the software? What am I getting out of it? And we also speak about industry, an industry specificity like distribution or manufacturing. And so we look at the industry process catalogs, we call them, and we say, is that, can I use this out of the box, right? Are there capabilities that we know this is how business gets done currently? And those capabilities are there, and I can set them up and use them. And then on top of that, we start to look at AI. And when we think about AI, we're thinking about, to Justin's point, and Dan said this too, it's a big umbrella, right? There's a lot under artificial intelligence. There's generative AI, there's machine learning, there's other use cases out there. And so some of that you can bake into the product. We've been doing that already where, I can push a button, it'll help, do product descriptions. I can push a button, it'll generate shift reports, or, there's capabilities to do that. And then we're really getting into the process automation. So when I combine AI with process automation, that opens up a whole new world, right? So we talk about the user experience, and then we need to start talking about the automated experience. What are those things that were being done in the past that we don't need to do anymore? I get an invoice, I get a piece of paperwork from a customer. Can I feed that in there? And the system tells me, oh, I know what this is, here's what I should do with it. Or it's an exception, someone needs to look at it, right? And all of a sudden we start thinking about that productivity improvement, leveraging that value case. And one of the things we've been doing is really starting to package those up. We see in different industries, these use cases that are very specific, or, that's like everyone's doing those. And how do we package that up so that it's very repeatable? So there's capabilities out of the box, right? There's, generative AI buttons that can do functions for me. There's, behind the scenes where we're able to do, planning capabilities and leverage machine learning now, instead of, just if-then statements in the background, right? So we're able to improve there. And then there's these custom RPA, or robotic process automation, coupled with AI, where we can really start to enhance productivity and actually use the thinking power of machine learning to be able to help drive that process and really start to remove some of that repetitive work that's out there that people don't really want to be doing. So when we think about that, what does that mean on the advanced ERP? We think about that platform and being able to build for the future, and what capabilities are there for my industry so that I'm not starting from scratch and I can start to, gain that value right away.
So your definition of the DreamStack ERP is that it's got a lot of this automation, RPA, and AI that's taking work out of the equation for people to do. Is that
It is generating that value. I mean, I think that's really where we want to be able to look, what am I getting out of my ERP? And then there's those other components around it, the edge, as they like to refer to it, where we get into, advanced capabilities. Modern ERP is really growing a lot of those, but then sometimes, there's areas where we look to best of breed solutions, and being able to integrate with those effectively so that I'm not spending years trying to connect to, a Spiro.ai, when I already have that stack in the back that can, integrate that very quickly and efficiently.
just discuss cloud for ERP? For most of the other functions, definitely e-commerce, CRM, other functions as well, the transition to cloud has been pretty well complete. What do you see in the ERP world? Is it complete? Is it pretty much complete now? Whereas 3 or 4 years ago, there was still more transition on the part of distributors and vendors. How do you think about that?
There's still some transition, right? There's, ERP is, it's a big project, right, to move ERP. So there are folks that are still holding on to their on-premise, their, legacy ERP. And I'm speaking just broadly, about ERP that's out there. But new projects, going to the cloud, folks really want to move on to that cloud. And I think we talked earlier about, what's underneath that, right? Like, I think, Neil, you mentioned that, what is it that's really the technology that's there, that's building that stack? And I think we're seeing that too, people asking that question. Is this ERP system, that I'm moving to that's in the cloud, is it actually cloud native? Or are you just taking, old software that you had and you're moving it onto cloud servers, right? There's a big difference. And people are realizing that, and that's something, that when they move to a cloud experience, right, they're looking for that. What are those new capabilities I'm going to be able to take advantage of? Am I being able to take advantage of truly that cloud security, and those native integrations that are there, within that new tech stack? Or are you just trying to move me to the cloud, right? So when, there's kind of a shift there, and we want to make sure people are taking advantage of that.
I might add to that, because we would see that in ECI as well, in terms of there are still, some folks that are holding on for dear life, on their on-prem solutions. But it is few and far between. I think most recently the big shift was a couple of years ago. You had to sell it. You had to explain it to folks. Nowadays, it's a given, and it's more like you pick up the phone and you're like, right, you got to move. It's time. Let's do this. And they're like, okay, here we go. Yeah, or they're picking up the phone and calling you. So you don't have to explain it the way you used to, or sell it to them and really get into the weeds of why it's important. I think that's been a big shift, even for the few that are still hanging on.
Yeah. I think it's that difference though between cloud hosted and are they moving to a multi-tenant cloud native solution, right? And that's really a differentiator. So we're, getting to that next generation platform with all the infrastructure advantages. That's where you really want to get people to go.
And I think, as far as the evolution, just to kind of put a bow on this, is we do come across a lot of organizations. As a matter of fact, we're in the process of closing a deal where they're still using carbon paper and putting it out on the manufacturing floor. I mean, so even going to, just basic cloud is going to be a huge leap for them. But I think operationally, the legacy systems that are on-prem, there's nothing wrong with them. They're doing fine, but they can't take advantage of that latest technology. And given the fact that the time to utility with artificial intelligence is overnight, I think organizations that are on-prem are realizing their competitors are eating their lunch if they're not moving to the cloud. So it's almost like, in some cases, it's a forced movement, but it is a necessary evolution to take on the new cloud technology. And Jeff, you're spot on. If it's not cloud native, it's to me, it's not truly in the cloud. Just because you're accessing it via browser doesn't mean it's cloud native.
Exactly. Agree with you there, Daniel.
Jeff, are you guys doing pretty much all new customers cloud, or are there new customers that are doing on-prem still?
It's predominantly cloud. So I would say ERP is really all cloud. And I say that because we have a wide variety of products, and there are some of the, the edge products that do have, limited release in other areas. But really, all prospects are going to the cloud.
To Robin's question, let's look at specific examples of AI use cases. Maybe Justin, starting with you in the CRM, specific things that you can do that make CRM the DreamStack CRM with AI.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Robin. So what we focus on Spiro is, so what we do is, I mentioned before, we bring in all these emails, these calendar appointments, phone calls automatically. We tie them out to customer records from your ERP, right? And it's a lot of noise. And so the thing we focus on Spiro is customer visibility and summarization. So kind of one of the core AI use cases of Spiro is this thing called Ask Spiro, where you look at a customer record in Spiro, and you can literally ask it any question you want about your data. So say customer XYZ is in Infor, comes down to Spiro, and you're seeing all these emails, you can ask it things like, hey, what kind of issues am I running into here? Or who's the person I have the best relationship with? Or anything like that. And so we're seeing with distributors a lot of the time, they're using this on their mobile app. And before they walk into a customer, they can ask Spiro on their mobile app and say, hey, what's going on here? What am I walking into? Have these guys had any production issues or any shipment issues that I should be aware of? What are the things I have to dance around? And so that's kind of the thing. It's like the use case we're trying to solve for is like, what if you had like the most on top of the ball admin ever, just looking through all your accounts, talking to everyone at your organization? And that's what we're trying to solve for. And that's kind of the thing that a lot of our customers are using this Ask Spiro function.
It's absolutely amazing to have, and would really prep that sales rep in a way that they have never been previously.
Yeah.
Neil, how about you in terms of the e-commerce world? What are some of the AI use cases?
So for us, what we've seen is there's been a couple, right? So the early ones were we're actually bringing information together, right? So some of the basic ones were, for example, we have a deep knowledge base, right? So because our Evolution X is almost like an ERP e-commerce system, it's that deep. There's so many different toggles and business-to-business features. It can be quite complicated to use, and so we have a big, like an ERP would have a very big knowledge base. And so whenever we had Intercom as an example, and somebody asked a question, how do I add a product, right? It would go through and it'd suggest a few individual articles to read. The difference now with AI is once we put a copilot in front of that, when somebody asks that same question, it'll actually pull from multiple different articles to pull that information together to give a more succinct answer. So instead of having to go through all the different articles to understand things, because your question might require multiple different articles, right? It pulls all that information together to give you a succinct answer, gets you there much, much faster. So that was like a kind of a baby version of it that that was a little bit surprising to us at how much more value it brought, even given the technology that we had before that was making all these suggestions already, right? Just bringing that information together. But I think in terms of say querying things and giving back our sales data and items like that kind of querying the information in a more user-friendly and unique way, that's super valuable. But really the game changer for us is really moving into that automation space, right? Where it's being able to actually do things for the user and do them at scale, right? So for example, right, a very basic use case would be, I need to add SEO content to a product. Okay, well, yeah, we have a button and you can use that there. But for us, most of our customers have 20, 30, 50, 150,000 products. How do you do that in bulk at scale in a way that you keep the human in the loop so that, when you do things at scale, dangerous things can happen. You want to be able to make sure that, you're not breaking anything. And that automation, right? So there are a lot of different ways, and I think we've seen this on the e-commerce side for deep e-commerce systems. I think in ERPs, this will probably be true as well, where you have very deep systems. the ability to do things is still there in those systems, but you got to go over here, got to do an export there, got to do an import over here, tweak this data, toggle this, that sort of thing. Where to get where you want to go as a user can be quite complex. And there's good reasons why it's like that. But with the advent of AI and the ability to add agents to that, to those workflows, if you will, it can really, that's going to be the game changer for us. That's where it really takes something that might take a user maybe 10 minutes, 20 minutes to do something. This is a matter of just saying, hey, go do it. Or even better, like Justin was saying earlier, hey, do you want us to do that, right? In other words, prompting the user ahead of time going, hey, by the way, did you know this container or this catalog's about to expire? Are you sure you want that to happen? Or do you want to click this button and have us go ahead and take action for you? So that is where the real benefit is going to lie and be hugely beneficial for distributors right now that might have complex systems where they literally require hiring a person to manage those systems. Now, all of a sudden, instead of maybe 2 or 3 people to manage those systems, you might only have one, or maybe not even any at all, right? And that reduces the sophistication level of your users that are actually interacting with these technology stacks. So that's the big game changer for us, I think.
Seeing in the integration work that you're doing in terms of the big AI use cases that are providing value today?
So when we look at really what's, again, as I mentioned earlier, that the publisher, again, in this case, Oracle NetSuite, is kind of put AI in the product to prompt. And where we're seeing kind of the biggest bang for the buck is there's a couple of specific use cases. We refer to it as bill capture, but vendor can email a bill, you can scan a vendor PO, and NetSuite is automatically, the AI assistant that we've referred to as AI assistant just creates an AP bill for you in the system. We have a customer that they had 65 offshore resources doing that kind of work. After implementing this, they cut it down to 4. So there's still some interaction, but there was a huge cost savings for them. And not only does it enter the bill, but it says, well, I think the name of the vendor, I think I'm about 90% accurate. Can you review it? And if there is a mistake and you change it, it's machine learning. It never makes that mistake again. So you eventually get to a very high degree of accuracy. And I think one of the places that we're seeing more movement and additional use cases is, I can't remember which of the other panelists mentioned, but as far as the amount of data, data is the lifeblood of AI. And you're now able to crunch so much more data, even external to your system, that you can say, I have holiday orders coming up and I can interact with a weather service to say, is that going to impact my delivery of these products? It's just amazing the amount of data that you can put into AI. So I would say not only the processes that we're automating, like AP automation, but on the back end where you're getting like results-driven data that's looking at anomalies and predictive analytics because it's crunching so much data. That's really where we're seeing probably the biggest bang for our buck on the AI front, is in the analytics side of crunching that data.
NetSuite has pretty extensive AI functionality, and I know Infor does as well. Jeff, could
Yeah.
you take us through some of the key use cases you're seeing on AI and in and around the ERP?
Yeah, Daniel called out one. Invoice processing is a popular case. Where AI and automation can really make a dent. Can really drive value. Also seeing areas, in terms of on the sales side, pricing recommendations, product recommendations, right? How can I take a brand new, salesperson or desk agent and make them into a knowledge powerhouse, right? So that when they're interacting with customers, they know, oh, you're buying this. Do you also have these at home? Don't forget to buy this, and hey, can you give me a deal on that? Yeah, sure. Here's what I think I can do for you, right? So putting that knowledge in place for folks is really useful. And then on the distribution case, we had a nice case study here from one of our customers, Endries, that did parts matching, right? Where they're able to use AI to just help, coordinate the data, right? And really be able to match up parts and be able to understand what someone's talking about when they're looking for something or they're coming for something. That was an incredible value use case. They saved hundreds of hours, thousands of hours, I think, even in terms of, just searching online, trying to find the right part numbers, the right pieces and components. So, we're seeing value, in the, upfront when dealing with customers, and then also just, on the backside, right, when you're trying to get things organized. Those are really powerful use cases. And, I'm sure others are doing this too. We're really starting to catalog that, those use cases and make them available to folks, through, we're calling now our velocity suite. And really it's being able to take those core use cases, the AI component, the automation component, and the data, and really put them together and be able to duplicate those for others, right? So that we're no longer trying to go through and figure out like, all right, let's start from scratch. What we're going to do? It's like, so what do you want to be able to, you want to be able to parts match, or, you want to be able to process invoices. All right, well, here it is. We can set that up. We have a real starting block for customers, and we're able to make that work for them. But, as was mentioned earlier, it's really about that value and understanding, hey, where do I start? What do I do? And I think that's another piece that, all these companies are bringing the value to, is to help customers understand, where can I get that loan? Where can I get that leap? Where can I get value? Or I think I can make money. If I reduced margins, or if I applied AI, to my sales last year to, to optimize my margins, would I have made money? We can tell you now. Right? If you give us data, we can run that through and say, hey, look, here's what would have come out. Here would have been the opportunity. Let's do that moving forward for you, right? So we're also seeing, AI can help us figure out, what is that opportunity, right? What is that, what is that opportunity that we're missing? What makes sense moving forward? And we're starting to see that, that data analysis part of AI become more powerful.
Seems like a really, really huge ROI, the use cases that you just described. I want to shift now briefly. We've got a little bit of remaining time. By component, what are the things around the components that go with you? So let's start with you, Neil. So marketing automation might be a component that's around. Could you talk about the in the Dream Stack? What are the things that you need around your e-commerce solution?
So in the e-commerce space, what we're seeing, besides, like I said earlier, the integration with the master control of the data, typically for the distributors that we see, is the ERP. Beyond that, I would say CRM is a huge component that we see more and more, to be honest. I think PIMs are coming into play in a big way as well. And some of those are built into the e-commerce systems in a smaller way, but a lot of distributors are still struggling with poor data. And it's a wide variety, right? So it's a bit of a rainbow there, spectrum, right? Where you have some very, very top of the line suppliers that have very rich data, and then you'll have newer suppliers, because these distributors are broadening out their scope of what they're actually providing to their end customer, and they want to be able to provide that. That's where the opportunities are, and the margins are better, things like that. But then they're struggling with the data aspect of things. So the PIM and where AI comes into that is going to be a big play as well. And then beyond that, of course, analytics. And whether the analytics is inside of the e-commerce provider, or whether it's an external marketing, for example, it could be in CRM. I know in Spiro, as an example, analytics is just a really, really big piece of the puzzle. And it's also a really complicated one. It's kind of a scary one. It's one of these things. Let's go back to Google. Poor Google Analytics, right? It seems like the old guy in the room now with all the new technology we have, right? But Google Analytics has been around for a long time. Everybody turned it on. Nobody used it, right? That's what we saw, right? Or they barely used it, if at that. And I think with the difference now with AI coming in and the analytics that we're seeing is we're getting a lot more value from those, and we'll get deeper insights even inside of non-specific analytics tools, right? Whether that analytics is inside your ERP, whether it's inside your CRM or your e-commerce system, you're going to get a lot more valuable data there, and it's going to be easier to consume and take advantage of, and really return those ROIs without having to have external resources come in and show you how all these tools work.
Justin, when you think about CRM, what are the things that fit around the CRM and in the CRM Dream Stack world?
Yeah, it's really broad, I think. It's gotten more broad over the years. Things like e-commerce, ERP, obviously. ERP definitely is one of the things we talk to. I think for the most part, it's anything that's customer specific, like customer communication focused, like ticketing, email marketing, marketing automation tools like that. Anytime you're using a software to talk to a customer, I think it's important that data be housed in a centralized CRM, whether that's your marketing system or it's your sales focused or production focused system, but it should be housed somewhere. And there's a lot of neat things you can do if you can figure out how to consolidate and match the customers appropriately. There's really cool things you can do with that data, with those workflows.
Of ERP, but then what are the things sitting around the ERP that are part of the dream stack?
Yeah, so I mean, everything really falls around that dream stack. I think, we've ERP, and then, some of those traditional, advanced functionalities like warehouse management, advanced warehouse management, advanced demand planning. We're seeing a lot around the omnichannel presence with the customer, right? So whether it be e-commerce, integrating that with a CPQ in some cases. You traditionally see that in manufacturing, but as that becomes easier and easier to use and integrate, we're seeing distributors being able to pick that up as well. So a lot of those traditional applications around the ERP are really being grown, especially with AI capability. And there's tremendous opportunity to really grow into those as companies expand and really take advantage of those capabilities.
Jeff, question about the dream stacks that are available for smaller distributors, 2 to 5 million, but with potential in the market to grow. I'm sorry, this for Daniel. A lot of these platforms seem out of reach in terms of expense and support. Daniel, could you comment on that briefly for our audience?
Absolutely. So when you're looking at all-in-one solution, it really is, again, determining what core functionality you're looking for and what is the driver for the move. And we generally would provide an ROI. And as far as out of reach, it really is dependent in looking at several factors. And I'm not saying that the question is out of line, but it's dependent on what the organization's goals are, and does the budget align with those goals. I think one of the challenges that I've seen over the years is that organizations will view an investment like an all-in-one, let's just call it all-in-one ERP. It's a cost, where the companies that are successful are saying, okay, I see this as a mechanism of growth. This is an investment. It's not simply a cost. And that's not me trying to be salesy and talk you into it. They can be out of reach, but I would say the lowest price point, I mean, you're looking at, potentially getting into it for about 10 grand a year. So, and it scales upwards from there.
It's really compelling for the smaller distributors.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for a really rich discussion. I feel like we could probably continue for a couple more hours. We do need to wrap up. I'd like to share some pieces about upcoming events at Distribution Strategy Group. So a week from today, New Imperatives in Digital Strategy for Distributors, sponsored by Infor and by HawkSearch. And we'll be having Robin McGuire from Reinders and Darren Taylor from John. This is a distribution leader panel. You'll be having your peers talking about this topic. And then the week after that, on February 26th, we've got a discussion on distribution marketing executive interview, and very, very, very rich discussion on wholesale change. So we hope to see you all in the future. Once again, Daniel, Neil, Justin, Jeff, thank you so much for your time and for a very good discussion today.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, everyone.
Be well.